As 2019 is coming to an end, I really want to thank all of you who have decided to join and listen to this podcast. I do appreciate your input and your support, and happy holidays to all of you. Here comes the show.
Says what he wants, but he's so contradicted. He's a man of conviction, but he's never been convicted.
All right, everyone. Thanks for showing up. This is Matthew Gosson. I'm the host of Man of Conviction because I've never been convicted, but I am a man of conviction. Today on the show, Anthony Pearce. He's a production designer, art director, prop master, comic book artist, storyboard artist, and performer. A Renaissance man for sure. We went to a magnet high school in San Diego and rode the bus together every day. So really glad to reconnect and hear his story and his insight. Let's get right to it. So yes, we're rolling here. I am here with Anthony Pearce. I met you back at School of Creative and Performing Arts back in San Diego in, it would have been 83 or something. We were on the bus together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I remember you were the guy, because we had, I guess, experimental HBO cable in our area or something. You showed up on the bus and announced to everybody, go to this channel. MTV has begun. Mm-hmm. And I remember that changed my whole post-school time, because I watched videos for easily 3 hours a day for a long time after that. But yeah, you were the guy that passed that information on to me.
Yeah, it was funny. I was at a Who concert, one of the many retirement tours, and there was a big, huge presentation with big screens and all of that, which wasn't the norm at the time. And they announced that there was an all-music channel that was about to launch in 3 days. So 3 days later, I was sitting in front of my TV watching Test Pattern turn to Signal.
Wow.
You know, as
Video Kill the Radio Star came on. Right?
Exactly. They had I think J.J. Jackson was the first host in that first hour or whatever and stuff. And,
wow.
Yeah,
that was historical. That MTV has had such an impact on our culture.
It really has. Yeah.
I think so.
And I've worked on a number of music videos since.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. My favorite one that I production designed was for a band called Red Sun Rising for a song called Emotionless, and it had kind of a science fiction theme to it, so it had a cool narrative to it, and so it's not only a video that I enjoy, but I really love the song. Likewise with Scott Grimes, who is now on the Orville. The Orville. I'm sorry.
Sure.
Yeah, Scott Grimes is the co-pilot on the Orville.
Oh, okay.
He and I are friends now through his sister Heather, because I worked with her on a project building life-size Rock'em Sock'em robots for Dave and Buster's. But
wow.
That was a fun project.
I bet.
But that was kind of reuniting for Scott and I, because I had actually storyboarded his first music video way back in the day when I first got to LA. That was one of my first gigs.
No kidding.
And so between storyboards and production design and everything else and stuff, I've done a lot of music videos. And of course, always a pleasure for me having come from those origins with MTV.
Sure.
Yeah.
I tried. My wife is a very talented artist, and my 16-year-old son has the gift, you know, and I tried to get my wife into storyboarding. I was like, it's a really very sort of hard to get in, but once you get in and they like you can work all the time, and it's great money. And she was like, nah. I mean, she's a teacher now, so she's doing a very noble thing, but I think there's a chance my son, I might try to get him into it. He can really throw down a pencil. It's impressive.
It is a lucrative endeavor. There's I don't storyboard much these days.
Sure.
I still do, like when I'm helping out friends with projects and stuff, but I'm typically higher up the food chain in the production design role. But storyboarding was a huge gateway, because I'd always wanted to be a comic book artist, and I got an opportunity to do that, and I loved it, but it just wasn't really a financially viable industry at the time. This was the mid 90s. This was right around the time that Marvel Comics was going into Chapter 11 and stuff, and so it was just hard to get those kind of gigs. And even if you were on a monthly book, that you're penciling roughly a page a day at 28 pages a month. So where is your life? you know?
Yeah.
So when I moved to LA, my skill set, translated well to storyboards, and I went in and kind of learned the vocabulary of that. So I storyboarded a film for Darren Lynn Bozeman called The Desperate, which was going to be his directorial debut. And we were working on it together just right around the time they launched the first Saw movie, and Lionsgate decided that they wanted to adapt The Desperate into Saw 2, which is how Darren wound up directing 4 or 5 Saw movies. And Darren was still in the process of selling himself as director to Lionsgate, and not just as the screenwriter. So we did a whole bunch of conceptuals, a whole bunch of I was designing killing machines and stuff and deaths for the Saw movies. And there was one in particular that didn't make it into Saw 2, and I was sad because it was one of my favorite illustrations that I had done for it, and it ultimately wound up falling into the climax of Saw 3. It was a scene where Jigsaw's protege is freeing the Cary Elwes, who was trapped in the first film, and then suffocates him with a plastic bag, and so I had done this design for that moment. And then to see it ultimately come to life in Saw 3 was very unexpected, because that just came out of the blue.
Satisfying, I'm sure, but man, I have such a vivid imagination that it's hard for me to watch horror films because the images stay with me and haunt me. Mm-hmm. I guess I know it's all fake, and I know it's just all good production, and I get that, but man, I am that guy that just is like, I can't even look. I haven't seen a needle go in somebody's arm. I'm just, yeah. So I just wanted to share that. Not that I don't honestly have the utmost respect for that stuff, but to create it and draw it and yeah, I guess you got to be able to go there and sort of be clinical about it.
Yeah, I'm kind of jaded when it comes to horror. I grew up very much in that genre. And it took a while for me to accept the fact. There were a lot of things in my life that it's like, well, that's a no-no, and that's a no-no, and that's a no-no. And like punk music and comic books and horror were all things that I was told growing up, were not viable, and you shouldn't do that, and they'll rot your brain and whatever else. And instead, once I accepted my passion for them, they all turned into very lucrative careers.
I bet.
Yeah, but I know I have a lot of friends that really can't do the horror thing, and it's and it's a shame because obviously there are projects, films of mine, Tales of Halloween, which is an anthology film of horror stories. I worked with a lot of good people on that, and then All the Creatures Were Stirring, which was written and directed by Rebecca McKendry over at Blumhouse, and her husband Dave McKendry wrote an amazing script for it, and that was an anthology as well. But it's an anthology of horror stories that are all Christmas themed, and
That's cool.
So I spent about 2 years doing Christmas, off and on, and I've done a lot of Christmas movies. I'd be happy to never do another one.
I know as a director, a lot of people get their entry by doing horror films just because they're generally lower budget or whatever. I will say that I'm certainly open to directing a horror film. I could do it if I was the one telling the story, I guess. I'd crew on one too. It would be fun.
What would you like to do if you crewed on a horror film? Because I'm always building art teams for movies.
I could definitely work in the camera department.
Okay.
I could work in the art department.
Mm-hmm.
Props. I can build stuff. Probably not too much heavy lifting. I mean, camera department. I'm just whatever. I'm 51 and I'm not built to carry a lot of heavy stuff. But I think I would thrive in the camera department, and definitely even like first AD, second AD. I could do that job.
I know a lot of amazing people who run departments, and I'll connect you with some.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
And I definitely would love to show the people some of your art, your comic book stuff. Just send me some of your favorites, a few examples of each, and I'll put a few up on the thing. Thank you.
Certainly, yeah. It's been a minute since I've done comics, but I still do it occasionally just because I love it. So if I do some lucrative projects that allow me that window, because you really can't do them for the money.
Sure.
Yeah.
You have to come up with the concept and then send it overseas to get all the, especially if you can do some animation project, right? It all has to be done overseas if you're gonna.
Yeah, I've done like storyboards and what they call keyframes for animation. I don't do animation. I don't do like cell by cell advancement type of sequence, but I have done keyframe work and conceptual design for animated projects.
And when you say that, that's instead of doing cell by cell, it's more like, start here and then you in 3 seconds later that cloud is across the and then looping. That's exactly what you mean by keyframing.
Yeah, it's the extreme. Is the extremes of any pose. So imagine like a baseball pitcher. You would do the arm cocked all the way back, and you would do the energy of the actual throw and release. But an in-betweener animator would come through and do the arc of the arm moving to that position.
In-betweener.
Yeah.
Yeah. The specialist of animation, that's fascinating. There's people that really do specialize, and I just do backgrounds or I just do color.
Right. Yeah.
I know someone who she was telling me she was working on the grass movements and hair movements. Like that was her area, and so she was focused on. There was like a lot of math involved. She would just kind of.
I was just going to say, in-betweeners especially, there's a lot of math because you are talking about the arc of motion and making certain that that all of that is fluid and flowing in a natural form, and you have to be able to work out the math on that. Which I'm not a math head, so I do keyframes.
Totally. I guess tell me about after you got that first job in the art department, and then how did you keep it flowing? And it's about constantly impressing people, right? With the amount of time and what you can do for the amount of money.
That is actually a really good description of how things played out for me, because I was doing storyboards for a horror film called Sutures, and the director of that, Tammy Sutton, she and I just really clicked, and there were moments in it that we kind of arrived at through discussion of these scenes, where she got these beautiful shots. There's one that of someone dragging a body behind them as they walk past an open door, and so there were these moments that we arrived at together. And so she ultimately kind of asked me what my skills were in terms of art, and I wound up working in the physical art department on that shoot. Although we had a lot of PAs involved, I guess I just had my hands on more art elements because I was always like, what's the next mission? Which when I'm running an art department, that's what I teach my people. What's the next mission? What's the next thing? Empty hands don't get a movie made.
Can I get a jump on something?
Yeah. So by the end of that film, the production designer, Tim Warman, was had approached me, and he said, what do you want to do with your career? What credit would help you? And they said, there's no one with the art director credit on this, and you've done more work than anybody. Would that help you? So that was the first time that I got an art director credit.
Oh, very cool.
And I'd worked in art departments. I mean, I built, when one of your interviews, Pippin, a production of Pippin from our old school came up. I had done sets for Pippin. I mean, I'd been doing art sets, all my life and stuff. But this was the first time that I really looked at, okay, I started out to be a comic book artist. I'm not doing that. I'm still very heavy into my writing, but what can I be doing on set? And yes, I would like to do that. So that art director credit allowed me to, even if I was going to wear a smaller hat on another production, if I was going to come in and do props or something, that sort of opened that door for me. And this is an industry very much about who you know. But that is something that you earn along the way. You treat everyone with respect. Treat everyone.
Sure.
I've shot short films that had no budgets, and the PAs that they threw me were producers who hired me later.
Right.
You don't know who it is that you're being kind to, so just do. It also makes for a better work environment.
It's so true, dude. It's so true.
So over the years, it's just all been, I'm never looking for work. Knock on wood. It's always repeat clients or referrals. Clearly I'm making somebody happy.
Right.
And that's really, that's all I want to do.
Now, for the people that don't know about the world of the art department, how does the hierarchy work? You have kind of a prop department, and then art director, and then production designer?
Sort of. Well, I'll take it from the top down.
Please.
The hierarchy of a film, you've got your producers. Your director is the manager of all of the departments. For art department, the production designer runs the art team. Their art director is really the one to execute the vision of the art of the production designer,
Right.
Who, of course, is executing the vision of the director.
Right.
So the production designer is in charge of props, sets, practical effects, picture vehicles, any sort of weapons on set, and wardrobe, beauty makeup, practical effects makeup, and all of that. So anything that's in front of the camera is the production designer's responsibility to deliver.
Right. And yeah, thank you for explaining.
Oh, sure.
So you've been doing this pretty steady with self-imposed breaks for over 25 years.
Yeah, since I founded my art studio, Gothic Graphics, in 1995. And at that point, I was doing comic illustration and rolling into storyboards at that point. So within a couple of years, I was in LA and making movies.
That's awesome. I can't believe so much time has gone by since I haven't called you and asked for a favor, to be honest. I had a good run for many years, and I guess I was just stuck in the Tonight Show happily for so many years.
Sure.
Now I'm doing podcasts, and I also produce a podcast. He calls me his engineer, but Ross Matthews has a Straight Talk with Ross Matthews, and he does it at his house, and he now has Patreon members, and we have 5 cameras that are mounted.
Oh, great.
I'm doing live switching and throwing a little bit of graphics on there, and then putting that out for the Patreon members too, and which is really fun doing that every week. And like if I could get like 2 or 3 or more of those a week, I'd be done. I'd be fine. I could just do that because I really like it, to be honest.
Well, that's cool. I've been looking at. I have had a project in the works for a while that ultimately I think needs, at the very least, a podcast to support it.
Well, I could definitely produce that for you.
Yeah. I have a project called Shake a Comic. It's a book. It's a nonfiction book. The full title is "You Can't Shake a Comic and Have a Movie Fall Out." And it's all about the challenges of adaptation. How do you succeed or how do you fail in terms of adapting a comic property? If you're looking at something that's a limited series, that's easier to adapt. If you're looking at something like X-Men that's got 50 years of history behind it, where do you even begin? And so I've actually talked with David Hayter, who wrote the first 2 X-Men movies and Watchmen. Have tremendous respect for David's approach, especially to Watchmen. I think it was a brilliant, very pragmatic approach, and
It was cool.
Yeah. So I wanted Shake a Comic to be kind of.
I love the name.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It has 3 purposes. One is to potentially educate a new generation of filmmakers who are facing these challenges and who may not necessarily come from a background from the source material. It's also there to give voice to creators who already have work that's out there. And once your art is in the world, aside from like maybe a DVD commentary that you recorded a year earlier,
right,
you really have no way to address feedback and pushback that your project is getting. It just gets to be crapped on for the rest of eternity.
From the diehard fans who must weigh in.
Yes, exactly. Which is the third thing. I'm a fan. And my book literally opens, in my introduction, I say, this book is going to piss you off.
That's great.
Because I've had enough discussions. I am a fan. I've been collecting comics since I was 5 years old. I love the source material, but I also understand the process. I've worked in both worlds. And that doesn't make me unique, but it does at least provide an informed opinion.
Sure.
And that's really the clincher, is having an opinion is one thing. Having an informed opinion is another. And so it's not that I want to invalidate the opinions of the fans, but they become attached to properties that they do not have a right to.
Sure.
That they get emotionally attached. It's kind of like, I'm going to take this away from comics for a moment.
Please.
As fans out there rage. I'm not a sports guy. I look at sports and I'm like, okay, people get really emotionally invested. People have heart attacks when it comes to like the Super Bowl and stuff. And ultimately, they have no say. All they can do is react to decisions that are out of their hands. Who's going to be traded? Who's going to, whatever. The money men are not listening to the fans. They implement no change based on fan input, and yet emotionally, sports fans are so married to this
and dedicate
yeah
hours
Yeah.
and hours of their lives and thinking and discussing this with people as if their lofty opinions will have any effect. And
exactly.
it's just so that when that trade does happen, or when that one player who they said that they should get does well, they can go, you see, I
Right.
told you.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, so go manage a team. What can I tell you?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And so it's the same with comics and with video games that have very avid cultures. The difference is there is impact that that comic productions and comic adaptations to film have been impacted by fan output. Video games, especially. Video games are very much a live, evolving form, and so if you have something ongoing, like say World of Warcraft,
Yeah.
the opinions of the players absolutely impact the evolution of those games. Negative fan feedback has impacted films and films that we have gotten and films we have not gotten. One of my favorite examples is fans who kind of misinterpreted the ending of the second Fantastic Four movie killed the Silver Surfer movie that was in the works. It's like, well, I kind of really wanted a Silver Surfer movie, and now I don't have one because you guys didn't pay attention and got all pissy about it. So, and I understand, but
Deep down, you're like, how are these fans affecting the way it should have gone?
Right. Exactly. And I understand, but the book is really there to educate the fan base on everything, on costumes and on hair and on I mean, I have a whole chapter on hair. Because they get very married to these things from the source material. Johnny Storm's not blonde enough, and there are all of these decisions that go into. I mean, film is a series of compromises.
Totally.
It is a team endeavor, and when you're creating a comic book, you've got a team of maybe 5 people. And that's all the input that you require, and you can get this thing out there. And then that rolls over into a script, which is the interpretation of a few different people. And then it's in the hands of a crew of 50 to 300. Everyone on a film set impacts the ultimate product. The crafty person impacts morale for that 50 to 300 people.
So true.
So there's no one involved whose fingerprint is not on that movie. And so you can't expect that you're going to shake a comic and have a movie fall out. That it's just that things are going to be interpreted directly from source material without transition. There are compromises all through the process, from the money on down, to the execution on the day, when all of a sudden, a location burst into flame. I was on my way back to LA to shoot a film, and I got call that our location was on fire. There were wildfires raging in the mountain. We were shooting in a cabin. Things change, and you have to adjust because there's a film schedule to be met.
And as far as adaptation in general, there's like a few books that I've loved and thought, man, this could be a great movie, but you'd really have to change it. And then some that sort of play out as they're already sort of a screenplay, a lot of dialogue, and then a description of a scene, and then some more dialogue, and then and you're like, okay, this is flowing like a movie. The art of turning a good book into a book that would take you 20, 30, 40 hours to read, and turning it into a 2-hour movie that has the same vibe and takes you on a similar journey is really hard to do. It is. And I don't approach the decisions that have to be made lightly. Do you know T.C. Boyle? I know the name. He's T. Karageson Boyle. Okay. He's written a bunch of books. That movie with Matthew Broderick about the Kellogg brothers, do you remember that movie? He wrote the book that movie was based on. Well, anyway, his first book is called Water Music, and I highly recommend it. Okay. It is man, it is so cinematic, and it would just be so expensive, and it would probably have to be 3 movies, and but it would be 200 million each movie. That's the kind of scale it is. But when I read that thing, and I've read it twice and learned new words, the guy used these very fancy.
I love that.
Yeah, like you have to look up stuff, and you're
Harlan Ellison was like that for me. It was funny because I grew up reading Harlan's work and loving the fact that he would challenge my vocabulary and make me go look stuff up. Ultimately, I became friends with Harlan and got to work. I did graphics for his last spoken word album. I actually am responsible for all of his spoken word albums having happened.
Oh, great.
So so I grew up reading Harlan Ellison and loving how he would challenge my vocabulary and make me look stuff up. And I loved the fierceness of his writing and how genuine he was as a person. And he had a spoken word album called On the Road. And I had a buddy of mine who was my roommate, and he would hear me playing this album. So years later, he's in Atlanta, and he calls me, and he says, "What was that thing that you would play all the time?" And so I told him, I said, "Well, that was Harlan Ellison on the Road." He says, "Harlan's going to be at Dragon Con, and I want to approach him." My buddy had a music label at the time. Said, "I want to approach him about reissuing that on CD." So he met with them, and they worked that deal out. We lost Harlan just a few months ago. I don't know if you know, but and I was on set working on a film called Preacher 6, and I got the call from my buddy that Harlan had passed. I was literally 3 mouse clicks away from completing the graphics, the album cover for, I think it was volume 7. And I was saddened by that, but of course, as soon as we wrapped, I went and just finished the thing and sent it off as, get this to Susan, his wife. And so over time, I had contributed an essay to the foreword of a tribute to Harlan and stuff. And so it was nice to have that proximity. We met a few times, and always gracious, always a sweet guy. And I will forever miss him. He genuinely impacted my life in a tremendous way.
Well, I'm going to seriously look him up now because I don't really know much about him, unfortunately.
And just a very, very insanely prolific writer, possibly the most. I mean, it's ridiculous how much work this guy churned out, and so much of it is good, and so much of it is powerful and insightful and biting. Well,
I'm definitely going to inspect him a little bit, for sure.
So I've been acting since I was a kid, but I was acting off campus. I wasn't really doing stuff like at the school or whatever. So I don't think a lot of the peers at SCPA even knew that I was. And I did that up until I was about 30, and then I died. Literally, I was, my asthma and allergies conspired to fill my lungs with fluid, and I was rolled into the emergency room, totally blue, no oxygen left in my body. Got the big old Pulp Fiction horse needle to the chest to kickstart my heart, and it was time for a transition in my career. And so I kind of went back to my original passion of art and writing, and chased that dream to be a comic book artist, which I got to do for a little bit, but it's not really a financially viable industry, or wasn't at the time in the 90s. It was too hard to make a living at it. And so my wife at the time and I moved to LA, and I had an opportunity to start to adapt like some of my writings to screenplays. But those my first attempt at a screenplay, I was adapting a novel I'd been writing that covered a span of 250 years of American history, which I did not have the skills to adapt into a screenplay, and it was a hot mess. But it did inspire me to learn that craft, and so I started taking every class that I could for screenwriting, read every book, all the Sid Fields and the Robert McKee and the Save the Cat and everything else. So I just really tried to focus on strengthening that. So I started taking like free gigs on Craigslist, doing rewrites and stuff, and ultimately wound up on a project that kept changing producers, and every time new producers would come on, they would have new notes. And I did rewrites on this project for about 3.5 years, just constant revision.
Wow.
So I came away with a great understanding of structure. And I have an outlining process that's very involved. It's 4 stages, and by the time I'm done with the 4 stages of outline, I can literally plug it into screenplay format, and I've got about 60% of my film.
Dude, you should teach a class. Seriously, that method, whatever, because I think I could probably benefit from that.
I'd love teaching.
Teach me.
I really enjoy it. In art department, I bring people on from PA, and I mentor them up the ranks. There are a lot of union production designers and art directors out there that started off as PAs with me. Likewise with screenwriting. I think that communication is vital. I think that poor communication literally leads to wars.
So true.
Yeah. There are consequences to poor communication, and so language, I think, is. I wrote a piece a little while ago called Nazis and Zookeepers, which was, and this is before there was a re-rise of Nazis in our culture, but it was about that language, that good grammar and a care for language is kind of a dying thing, and we are sort of the caretakers of that. We are the zookeepers of caring about the value of communication and how important good communication is. And so so all that goes into my writing very much. So the scripts, I had an epiphany a little while ago about my screenwriting, that I've been, because of my production design work, I'm so integrated into the indie horror community. There's some of my favorite people, and I love working with them. But I realized that I kind of, I'm not good at scaring people. I'm good at thrilling them. I had to take a look at what my strengths were in terms of my writing, and ultimately my dialogue and complex twisting plot structures are really, my strengths, which don't lend themselves well to horror, but benefit me tremendously in thriller. So I started looking at a lot of my scripts and going, okay, did I shoehorn this into a genre that it doesn't belong in? So I rewrote several of my scripts. I do a lot of commission work. I do a lot of commission screenplays, writing for other people. They come to me with the idea or whatever. But I write a lot of original stuff, and I looked at those, and I'm like, this would be better served as a thriller, and so I would do rewrites. But on a side but related note, my ex-wife hated the horror stuff that I did. She was very kind of intimidated or disturbed, I should say, by this content. And it was always that question of, like, how does this reflect on our lives, our marriage, or, whatever.
Right.
It didn't. These are stories.
Sure.
The stories go where they need to go.
Where she would be like, you don't want to do that to me, do you?
Right, exactly.
Like, no, I'm just writing how this particular guy would kill this particular woman.
Yes. That have our names. No. So I began to somewhat consciously and somewhat subconsciously kind of curtail my edge. And I always figured I could sort of turn it back on. So when I got divorced, I'm like, okay, I can write what I want to write or whatever. And the edge wasn't there. And I started to fear, like, oh my God, was this just the angst of my 20s? And now, I was in my 40s at the time. So a few years ago, I stumbled across, and I cannot sing their praises enough, Screenwriting U, created by Hal Grossman, is a screenwriting school. They offer all sorts of courses, and I came into a course called the Pro Series. It was the screenwriting course I've been waiting my whole life for. It is the answers to all of a writer's questions in the process of developing a screenplay. And so I began taking some of their auxiliary courses, and one of which was on thriller. Well, I had just picked up a gig writing a true crime story based on real events that have been on America's Most Wanted. And so I'm like, okay, it's a good time for me to really focus on this whole thriller thing that seems to be happening all at once. So I get 5 lessons into the course, and I realize that the script that I've brought to the table is not really compatible with the structure that they want to work with in the class. It was very protagonist-antagonist, and the one that I brought was more sort of man versus nature rather than man versus man. So I went back to a script that I had shelved a long time ago. I'd completed it, wasn't happy with it, it was kind of boring, and I'm like, okay, I'll set it aside. Came back to that, and it lent itself very well to it. So as I was kind of catching up and doing those 5 lessons, this script that I had written that was boring and horrible, and I never would have sold it, as I was doing the lessons, it began to transform. And by the time I was caught up on my lessons, I was crying. I was literally weeping, going, oh my God, my edge is back. This is dark and disturbing and delicious, and I couldn't be happier. And then a week later, another project I had shelved married itself to a project that I'd always wanted to do. I had a script called First Person, a great concept. But just my execution of it, I was a novice writer when I attempted it. And I'd always had a fashion with the Mother Goose nursery rhyme Solomon Grundy. There have been a lot of attempts to do Solomon Grundy. DC has a villain, Solomon Grundy, and everyone always goes the zombie route. And I realized that Where I wanted to take that and where I wanted to take first person, they were the same script. And when those two married, it became this amazing, it's one of the best things I've ever written. I'm polishing it off now. I have chills right now thinking about how happy I am with this. I don't want to say how good this script is because, everybody thinks their stuff is good.
But you could just feel as these two came together, you're like, this is how it was supposed to be.
Yeah. And it's amazing. And it's a single location, 3 principal characters.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's a producer's dream.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
And I already have producers that are interested in that one. I have a number of producers that have expressed interest in an adaptation that I'm doing. A while ago, I ran across the trailer for a video game, and the graphics in it were very simplistic, but the heartline was very solid, and it was about a son rescuing his mother. And it just spoke to me. And even though it was just 3 minutes of very minimalistic graphics, I'm like, oh my God, I totally see every frame of a full-length feature family film, live action. And so I tracked down the game's creator, and we met, and I had a presentation for him. And then a little while ago, they completed all the legal specifics over at their studios in London. And so we just signed the deal for me to write the adaptation.
That's great.
Yeah, that was very much you gotta make your own opportunities.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of stuff out there that would really benefit from adaptation. Like you were saying in our conversation earlier about, you see comic books and go like, wow, that series would be great if they do it right.
Yeah.
And like with Shake a Comic, where I kind of was skipping a beat earlier, was about, there's a chapter in there that deals with capturing what is iconic. And that's really what it boils down to is you can adapt something frame for frame, like Sin City is pretty much panel for panel the comic.
Right.
Watchmen, in many regards, there's so many elements that they, especially in terms of production design and the design of the world, they pulled very directly from the source material, which is great to see, and it's great when it works. I wept the first time I watched Watchmen in the theater because I'm like, okay, this thing that I've loved all my life is being manifested in front of me, and I'm so grateful for that. But then I had to go back to the theater and watch it again and look at it in terms of, does this work as a narrative by itself? And I felt like it was truncated and it was compressed. And I thought, okay, I'm going to wait until I see the director's cut because I have a feeling it's going to give it the room to breathe, which is exactly what it did. And ultimately I feel like the end product, there's a thing out there called the Ultimate Watchmen that's got even the animated stuff for the pirate comic and stuff is all incorporated back in. Tales of the Black Freighter is incorporated, so you can watch the whole graphic novel.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it's kind of wonderful. But I think David Hayter's choices in the script were brilliant. Because here was the challenge that that project faced was that by the time it was being adapted to film, there was 25 years of other creators being inspired by that work. And if they had done an adaptation that was just straight up out of the comic, if they hadn't made the changes that they could, they would have looked derivative, even though they were the source. A good example is the ending of Saw is a scene with Rorschach from the comic. And so they had to revise that scene, and they made really smart choices because that has to be the scene where Walter Kovacs really becomes Rorschach. The psychology shifts because he's faced with someone who's just a total immoral killer, and that's just a reality that he has to process. They captured that on screen with Jackie Earle Haley's performance while in a mask. So intense and so telling. They captured that rather than go the route where it just would have been the same scene from the end of Saw. So there were a lot of things where they had to the entire plot of the Incredibles is from Watchmen. It's the Keene Act.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, and I'm not saying that any of these creators were stealing from Watchmen, but rather growing up with that material, they were inspired in these directions.
An homage, if you will.
Sure.
That's a fancy way of saying, I'm going to be borrowing your idea.
Yeah. Well, they say that bad artists borrow, good artists steal. And I believe in that because when you steal, you make something your own.
Yeah.
You take ownership and it becomes your thing. If you borrow, then you're just giving it a paint job.
Yeah.
And that's just theft.
Yeah.
That's just taking Jedaks and Jeds and making them Jedi, and taking Banths and making them Banthas, And yeah, I mean, the John Carter was raped for Star Wars.
Was he?
But oh yeah, the Edgar Rice Burroughs entire series. There's so much in it that it lifted. It's like that's not adaptation. That's adding a vowel.
Wow.
Yeah.
George Lucas adding a vowel.
Yeah.
My story.
Right. But yeah, that's a rant I can go on forever, but I won't.
You just wrapped a movie.
Yeah, I just wrapped working on a vampire western. There's actually there's a strong NDA on it, so there's only so much I can say on the air right now.
Sure.
But a very fun project and great people involved with it, and I can't wait to see the end product. What I'm so excited about, though, is that this year I've had so many releases. Like everything is hitting theaters, hitting Netflix, hitting Amazon.
Like over the past 2 years, the stuff you've worked on is all bearing
Exactly.
fruit.
Yeah. And some stuff has sat on the shelf or been in production or looking for distribution or whatever. It's funny because when you're on the film set and the tourists walk by and they're always asking like, was it going to be in theaters? Like, we don't know.
Yeah, no idea. Maybe.
Yeah. This is one of the realities of making film is that you're out there making the best product that you can with the resources that you have. But ultimately, the life that it's going to have is entirely up to what distribution deal you can get, and there are so many factors involved in that. In terms of the what names you have attached, or whether or not it's something that the market will bear at the time. It just might not be the right time for it. One of the first action films I ever production designed, a thing called the Bus Driver, was just released last year, and that was like at the start of my career. That was ancient. Funny thing about the Bus Driver, it was a good example of. Amazon, Google, Facebook must be terribly, terribly confused about what I like because they keep sending me banner ads for things that I needed for a shoot 6 months ago. I only needed it on that day. I will never need it again. And Bus Driver was one of those where we had to do a gag of a tire being blown out on a bus. Well, you can't do that with a car jack. You can't just, use a regular car jack, take it up and, change it out for a busted tire. So, and they didn't have the budget to jack the tire up and actually do it practically. So I spent about 2 weeks prior to that day, stopping on the side of the freeway and collecting retread, collecting pieces of tire on the sides of the road, throwing it in my trunk so that I had a whole bunch. And ultimately we dressed the tire and shot it from an angle where it looked blown out.
Nice.
But that's kind of the story of my life and this weird psychology that you can't stop looking. Every time I've done a number of clown movies, lots of clown movies. So anytime I'm in, I'm shopping thrift stores for dressing for a Christmas movie or whatever, I'm seeing little clown figurines and going, oh, no, I don't need that anymore. But that's like where my brain lives.
You're triggered.
Yeah. When I did a Sinbad movie and an Aladdin movie, fairly close together. And it was funny because when they hired me for the Aladdin movie, I mentioned in passing that I had done the Sinbad movie, and that Sinbad movie was the one that the director had been looking at in terms of like the stuff I want for my Aladdin movie is this. I'm like, well, I did that movie, right? But when we did the Aladdin movie, it was on a very limited budget, and so in order to achieve it, pretty much everything I sourced for that film had to play numerous times. So we had to do a Cave of Wonders where I sprayed everything gold. And then those same items became dressing for the three palaces. And then they were all reduced back to an earth tone or whatever and stuff, as debris and rubble and another thing. And then we're all given a new paint job for the bazaar where they populated all the tables.
Wow.
But that's how you do stuff on a budget, is you just have to be creative about repurposing things in ways that the audience isn't going to just go, oh my God, that's the same vase.
If we turn it this way, they won't notice, and paint a different color, we're good.
Yeah, totally. And it worked. And in fact, the producer on that Aladdin movie came walking through our Cave of Wonders as I was laying in the finishing touches. Thankfully, it was just about done. He came walking through with his daughter and kind of show me. I had no idea who was going to be on set that day. And this is a producer I've worked with a lot, but it's always still producer on deck. And he comes walking through, doesn't say anything, but for the next 3 days, all I hear from actors are like coming out of their trailers going, all he talked about was the Cave of Wonders. Every meeting, as I'm getting, it's like, oh my God, dude, he loves your Cave of Wonders. And which was gratifying.
Yeah.
But then literally production like kept coming to me and going, here's more money. Keep doing what you're doing. And so I'm like, okay, clearly, yeah, this is working.
Awesome.
Yeah. So that was a great feeling. And I had a really good relationship with that studio. I did probably a dozen films with them or so.
Man, may you keep working until you cannot do it anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Do you have any crazy production stories?
I have a rule. It's never a real gig until you bleed for it, and I only do real gigs. I don't think there's been a production that I haven't been injured on.
Oh, man.
I almost lost my pinky working with sharks, preparing to, and it wasn't a bite. It was rubbing up against the skin of one, because those are rough too. But I was part of a small team that created animatronic sharks for Discovery Channel. Most Discovery Channel stuff is live footage. We were recreating attacks, and sharks don't take direction, and actors don't like to work with them. So we had to build sharks. But yeah, I've cut straight through my hand. Let's see. I cut straight through my hand because I was having to cut something in a hurry in the dark. I paused for a moment because I realized no one could see me. And I said, gentlemen, I'm bleeding fairly profusely over here. Thankfully, the production designer that I work with most frequently, Mark Fenlison, goes by Red Dog. I go by Stark. He was a Navy corpsman. And so he is my on-set medic when we were working together. And so I was ultimately taken care of. But I'm amazed that hand functions as well as it does.
Why is he Red Dog? Does he have red hair?
No, actually he was a blonde before it went gray. But he, being a Navy corpsman and then coming into film and doing practical effects and an awful lot of blood work, his paws were always stained red. So I think that's where that came from.
Okay. And why Stark? Is that a Game of Thrones reference?
No, but I get that a lot. It's actually an Iron Man reference.
Oh, sure. Okay.
Yeah. So I had a car in the driveway I was donating to charity. I'm like, well, it doesn't need to run. And I had a brick barbecue in my yard that with minor modifications, I could convert into a forge and heat and shape metal. So I just started pulling things out of the engine. And there's the scene in the first Iron Man movie where he's down in his shop. He's got the gray wife beater on, and he's just got the arc reactor and his repulsor gauntlet. I'm like, well, I can't do a full Iron Man armor, but I can make that. So in 24 hours, I made an arc reactor and repulsor gauntlet. I can send you pictures.
That's awesome.
And it was great at the party because I was a light source. It's a dark party. And yeah. So Red Dog saw pictures of that like 6 months later or something. And we were managing weapons on the show Deadliest Warrior. Leans sideways towards me and says, your call sign is Stark. And this was because on that shoot alone, we had, just on our art team, we had 2 Scotts, 2 Steves, a Mark Finney, and a Mark Fenny.
Wow.
Anybody that didn't have a call sign at that point was going to get one.
Right.
And for me, there's already way too many Anthonys on set. I became Stark and have been ever since. I answer to that. I have friends who knew me since early childhood. They call me Stark.
Well, Stark, let's wrap this up. Thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate you making the hike over from Canoga Park. No, Encino. No.
I'm in Reseda. Right next to Canoga Park.
Reseda.
Yeah.
Ciao for now.
Yeah.
That was Anthony Pearce. I put a bunch of stills of Anthony's work up on the website, manofconvictionpodcast.com. Go to his name under the guest links, and you can see a lot of what he was talking about. Anthony's work can be seen in the film Beyond the Law with Steven Seagal and DMX, just released on Amazon and Vudu, where you can also find his sci-fi thriller Stasis, the non-romantic comedy Bernard and Huey, starring Jim Rash and David Koechner, or for a dash of Christmas horror, check out All the Creatures Were Stirring, which is on Amazon, Vudu, and Shudder. Thanks for being a part of the show, because without you, I'm just talking to myself here in the backyard shack, so thank you. Send those complaints to manofconvictionpodcast@gmail.com. Ciao for now. Are you still here? If you're still here, then you most likely forgot to turn it off, or maybe you have it so it goes on to the next podcast. Well, This is, I guess, the equivalent of a podcast Easter egg of some sort. I'm going to now speak for 4 hours on the First World War and its untimely beginnings. Let's settle in. Okay, just kidding. But here's a little song to finish you off.
Says what he wants, but he's all contradicted. When it comes to boxers, the briefs, he's a little bit conflicted. Walks the streets of Atlanta, he's totally unrestricted. He's a man of conviction, but he's never been convicted.
Okay, are you still here? Come on. Seriously? All right, well, if you're hanging on this long, well, Jesus, you got a lot of time on your hands. Why don't you go to Patreon, search Man of Conviction Podcast, and become a subscriber? If you're that hardcore, I dare you.